Welcome to Aging on the Suncoast. I'm your host, Jason Martino. Each month, we try to bring you an upbeat and informative show. This month, however, we're going to explore senior abuse, neglect, exploitation, fraud, and scams. Not upbeat, but we'll provide great information on where to seek assistance. While these topics are not positive in nature, our intent is to inform our viewers that this is real and affects the lives of most of our most vulnerable. Did you know the United States Department of Justice reports that 1 in 10 seniors aged 60 and over will experience some form of abuse? Even more startling is about 1 out of every 23 cases of abuse go unreported. Last, seniors who are victims of abuse are more likely to be institutionalized than those who have not been abused. To help us understand these issues, we've invited Mike Mahoney with the Florida Department of Children and Families and Ana Marie Fiallos with Pinellas County Consumer Protection. Together, these two subject matter experts will help shed light on some serious topics that unfortunately have a prevalence in Pinellas and Pasco counties. Mike, welcome to Aging on the Suncoast.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate you letting me be here.
Yeah. And Ana Marie, long time. Welcome back to Aging on the Suncoast.
Thank you. Glad to be
You too,
here.
actually.
It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been a while. So, Mike, we're gonna start with you, and I don't think that everybody knows who DCF is, the Department of Children and Families. Can you explain a little bit about who the Department of Children and Families is?
Sure. Well, we'll shorten that to DCF because that's how everybody in Florida knows us,
Yes.
the Department of Children and Families. We are one of about 40 different combination of agencies or departments in the state of Florida. So the state of Florida government is pretty big. A lot of people know DCF for child welfare and access, which processes food stamps and Medicaid, but we cover a lot of different things. Well, and one of those things we cover is adult protective services. It's a little less known than child welfare, than child protective services. And in APS, Adult Protective Services, we do go out to the community and do investigations. We also offer some case management in certain situations. So in a nutshell, DCF has about maybe 10,000 employees, I think I read years ago, so pretty big.
Yeah, it is a pretty big agency over there. And I appreciate you using acronyms and then breaking them down because we all live in a world of acronyms, obviously, and we take that jargon very easily as we do our day-to-day work, but not everybody knows that.
Yes.
So unfortunately, we have to talk about some topics today that are not very savory. I totally commend you for entering this field, especially with the longevity that you've had in here and working with some of our most vulnerable older adults in the state of Florida on there. Let's start and understand how the Department of Children and Families defines the term elder abuse.
Yes, we could do that. For people who are watching, you can find this information publicly online too if you want to read it. And the statutes can be long and they can be dry, but essentially abuse is we define it as an act that's either willful by what we call an alleged perpetrator, or it could be a threatened act by this individual. And it can be an actual act, but can also be failure to do something. These can all fit the abuse definition. The key is that the alleged perpetrator causes harm to what we call the vulnerable adult. Let me define vulnerable adult briefly. This is somebody that's 18 or older in the community. It doesn't have to be an elder. It can be anyone 18 or older that suffers from a number of different impairments that prevent them from being able to live their life. So you have to have harm to this vulnerable adult by this alleged perpetrator. And one of the key parts of our definition and statute is who is the alleged perpetrator. We're talking about somebody that's a caregiver for the vulnerable adult. We also call them victims in our investigation. But it can also just be somebody who lives in a home that doesn't necessarily care for the vulnerable adult. And it can be any relative. Any relative at all can abuse you. They don't have to be a caregiver. They don't have to live in your home. But it's those three entities. Caregivers, household members, and relatives can all commit abuse.
Those are all good terms to understand, to mold into the bigger picture of what we're talking about today. Another couple terms that we throw around there meaningfully is neglect and self-neglect. How do you distinguish between them both, and really how is that related to abuse?
Well, neglect happens when a caregiver fails to give the vulnerable adult what they need, whether it's certain care that they need. Perhaps you're a caregiver who's supposed to be bathing and shopping for the vulnerable adult, if you are, when you abuse someone, you can be any of those things, but when you commit neglect, what we call second-party neglect, this is by a caregiver, someone you designate as your caregiver. You can't just be anyone and neglect somebody.
That makes sense.
Yes. And now self-neglect is just what it sounds like. It's when you don't take care of yourself.
Right.
It's when you don't go shopping, you don't get food, you don't bathe, you don't take care of your environment. With both types of neglect, whether it's second party or self-neglect, we often see similarities. Both of them will have issues with their environment. We might see trash outside. We might see a residence in disrepair. We might see, unfortunately, we might see excrement on the ground. It can be from the animals or from the poor vulnerable adult who's suffering. And this is not usually, it's not always by choice. Sometimes there is some choosing for this lifestyle, but often it's just they don't have the ability to do it.
Yeah,
hygiene. They need help.
Hygiene
yes.
is another issue.
Especially with self-neglect.
Yeah. So, and the last term, just to kind of set the stage on there, is exploitation.
Right.
How does the state define exploitation in your world?
We have kind of two tests to determine if the alleged perpetrator could be exploiting the vulnerable adult. One of them is that the alleged perpetrator stands in what we call a position of trust and confidence. They're entrusted by the vulnerable adult to handle whatever it is they might be exploiting. The other test is when somebody who is not necessarily in that position, but they should know that this person doesn't have the cognitive ability to participate in some kind of agreement. So if either one of those entities can be an alleged perpetrator, and we're talking about things like misusing funds in a bank account or buying property, entering into contracts like we don't want to see a new will with somebody who either doesn't have the cognitive ability to do it or who doesn't want to do it but is coerced or intimidated to do this by this entity that's doing it.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So we've set the stage with all the definitions that we use. They're good definitions. I mean, they really fit the mold of the individuals that we run into on a unfortunately a daily basis on there. So let's go back to abuse. What types of abuse are prevalent, and what are some of the red flags that you could shed some light on for our viewers?
Well, the first thing that we tend to think of is physical abuse, and that is when we see injuries on the vulnerable adult. We might see bruises, we might see burns or cuts, and these can be anywhere on the body of the vulnerable adult. We also can see bone fractures. Now, it's common. There's really two kinds of bone fractures. There's just your standard break in a bone, and this is common with our vulnerable adults, the elders in our community, because bones become more brittle, and there's a common diagnosis of osteoporosis, and you might have a break, but we'll get reports of spiral fractures, and that's usually indicative of some kind of mishandling or something that could be on purpose. We also have, I think I mentioned burns, I'm not sure, but we do see cigarette burns and cigar burns. We do have emotional abuse that occurs. We'll get reports with caregivers in the home that are yelling at the vulnerable adults or calling them names or preventing them from seeing their family or their friends in the community. So we investigate that. The final one that we investigate is sexual abuse. Unfortunately, we see some awful things with this, and the red flags with sexual abuse are bleeding or bruising near the genitals or the anal area. Sometimes and I think later we'll discuss maybe what cognitive impairments are like, what we look at, but how can someone with a cognitive impairment become pregnant or get an STD because they shouldn't be able to engage in sex? Yeah. But we'll get a report that that's occurred.
It's uncomfortable to talk about,
yes.
But sexual abuse is prevalent. I spoke to this in Pasco County at an outreach event too, and there was a small gasp among the crowd that didn't even think about those types of things. So abusers, we've talked about types of abuse. Let's talk a little bit about the characteristics of the abusers that you've had to investigate in your your tenure.
Yes, and what we have to do first is make sure it's clear that we do two types of investigations in the community. We do in-home investigations with people living in their residence. We also do facility investigations with institutions. Those are like nursing homes and ALFs. Well, in your home, the abuser is often going to be a caregiver. It's often a son or a daughter or a spouse. That's the most common. When you're talking about facilities, it's always going to be a caregiver in the facility. We have nurses and certified nursing assistants in the facility caring for these people, and they're often the people that that are alleged perpetrators.
Yeah, I bet. So in my monologue, the opening of the show, I spoke about the underreporting on that, and I talked about it on a national level. Same for Florida, underreporting an issue.
Yes, and we believe that. I believe from statistics that I've looked at over the last 5 years that we actually are receiving less reports than we did before. And no one's exactly sure why that is, but we do know that historically underreporting is always attributed to people not knowing that they should be making a report, and they don't know how to make a report.
Yep.
So.
Right. And that's a good segue into this, so I'll just use myself as an example. If I suspect a family member or a friend that's a senior in the community is a victim of abuse, what do I do?
Well, you can contact the Florida Abuse Hotline. The Florida Abuse Hotline is located in Tallahassee, and it never closes. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and holidays. You can call the Florida Abuse Hotline at 1-800-962-2873. You can also just remember to call 1-800-96-ABUSE for short. And we do offer ways to report by fax, and you can actually now go online and make a report. You don't even have to talk to anyone.
Yeah, and I always remember it by the 96-ABUSE. It's the easiest way for me, kind of like our elder helpline in some senses as well. Who's required to report abuse?
Yes, everyone. Everyone's required. If you know or suspect that someone is being abused, neglected, or exploited, or neglecting themselves, then you should call the Florida Abuse Hotline or make a report through one of those methods.
Okay. And kind of briefly, but as explanatory as you possibly can be, if I were to make a report, what are the types of things that I'm going to be requested to provide to help you with your investigation?
Well, the hotline counselor is going to want to know why this individual is a vulnerable adult. We don't have authority to respond to calls unless the person you're calling about is a vulnerable adult by statute. And we need to know what exactly is happening to them. Of course, we need to know their name, address, and their phone number. It's real important that we know safety concerns. Are there weapons in the home? Are there dangerous animals in the home? Are there holes in the floor that the investigator might fall through? We need to know these things. We need to also know who might be able to give us more information about the situation. We call those collateral contacts. The reporters need to know that their information is confidential. We do not by law disclose who is the reporter. We do know, and law enforcement will know, but we won't tell anyone else. It's actually a crime if we do. And they should know that the investigator will contact them if they provide their name and phone number.
Yep. Mike, you provide so much good information every time you're on the show. We obviously appreciate our partnership with the Department of Children and Families. You can't do it alone. We can't do it alone. Together we work to try to help the most vulnerable out there. Please stay with us while we take a short break. As usual, don't forget to have a pen or pencil ready. During the break and at the end of our show, we'll be running contact information for available resources. When we come back, we'll explore the issues of consumer fraud and scams.
Many of us don't want to believe that elder abuse, neglect, or exploitation can happen to a family member, a friend, or even ourselves. Elder abuse is a growing problem and is severely underreported. Many victims are reluctant to report due to fear, embarrassment, shame, or guilt. In order to prevent elder abuse, we must take action. Don't be afraid to talk about the issue and report it to the Florida Abuse Hotline at 1-800-962-2873. Together, we can make a difference.
Welcome back. During the first segment of today's show, we talked about elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. We now understand what to look for and how to report it. During the second half of the show, we brought back Anna Marie Fiallos from Pinellas County Consumer Protection. So let's examine consumer fraud and scams and the resources available within our community. Anna Marie, welcome back to Aging on the Suncoast.
Thank you, Jason.
Yep, Mike dominated our first show talking about the Department of Children and Family and all the wonderful things that he's doing. So I really wanted to concentrate on consumer protection because I know that you're a busy person, unfortunately, dealing with the investigations that you did. So Mike did us a service by helping us understand how the state defines exploitation. You obviously see exploitation in Pinellas County. Can you give us some examples of really what that looks like in your world?
Well, primarily with Pinellas County Consumer Protection, we're going to deal with financial exploitation. And this can be targeted by different types of parties. Sometimes it's an unknown party to the victim. It could be what we call a stranger, and this may be somebody who's coming door to door to solicit through phone calls. Sometimes the victim is isolated or homebound, so they build a rapport with that stranger who now becomes a friend. There's also businesses. They may have a financial planner or an attorney that's crossing the line and maybe having them sign new documents or documents that are not appropriate. And then, of course, the known party, like a family member or a neighbor or even a caregiver. That's somebody they should have that trust in that is taking advantage of the situation. Yep,
and I think what Mike was saying earlier, that person that has a certain level of trust with that person, exploiting them. We talked about red flags when it came to seniors that were victims of elder abuse, neglect, or exploitation. What are the red flags that you see in your investigations?
With financial exploitation, I think the first indicator would be if the victim primarily can pay their bills and then all of a sudden they're not able to meet those financial obligations. The money's not available any longer. Maybe it's money that's missing, money or jewelry or valuables, unexplained withdrawals from bank accounts or charges on a credit card. Maybe there's new gifts for that caregiver, that loved one, that just seems out of the norm or egregious. Maybe they're getting a boat or a brand new car. Those are all red flags that something may be going on and there may be exploitation to that senior.
Do you use the 1-800-96-ABUSE number to report exploitation as well?
We do provide that. The reason is that Pinellas County Consumer Protection, our complaints cannot be anonymous. So when filing through the Florida Abuse line, they can remain anonymous. With our department, you would need to provide your contact information as well as who you're filing the complaint against.
That's a good point about the anonymity in there. We're going to talk a little bit more about what a complaint looks like as well. We obviously are showcasing resources for Pinellas and Pasco County. In Pasco County, where does somebody report that exploitation as well?
Well, unfortunately, Pasco County doesn't have a consumer protection office, so they would need to go through the sheriff's department or local police department to file any case of exploitation.
Yeah, and I think after working with you for a number of years, you really kind of highlighted to me that not every county is as lucky as Pinellas County and is robust in that resource of having a consumer protection agency over there. So we're really thankful, and obviously Pasco County is in good hands with those reports going to the sheriff's office. So.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah. So scams. I won't call you the queen of scams, but you have so much more knowledge than I do on really what's out there currently. What is prevalent and that you're seeing these days in Pinellas County?
Well, first I want people to be aware that don't be on guard for just one type of format that a scam can be perpetrated. Keep in mind it's by telephone, which is very prevalent right now, text messages, email, door-to-door in person, or even mail solicitation. So all those formats can be used to perpetrate scams. We see with the telephone primarily, or the main scam we'd see is what we call imposter scams, where the scammer is pretending to be somebody of authority. These are your IRS calls, your Social Security Administration calls. They pretend to be utility companies or Medicare. There's a warrant out for your arrest. They're impersonating somebody of authority to intimidate the victim into giving personal and financial information. Door to door, you may have a so-called contractor coming to do repairs, and those repairs just continue on and the money continues to flow out to that individual. And again, with solicitations, a lot of consumers contact me. They receive some kind of sweepstakes, or there's unclaimed money that is being left to them that they need to, provide information, a bank account, so that the money can be deposited. So there's all different forms, and again, consumers need to be aware that if it's unsolicited, that you haven't initiated this, but yet you're being requested to give personal or financial information, to make payment, to win money, those are all red flags that it's a scam. And again, scammers are very convincing. It is their full-time job. So if you do think it's legitimate, you think it might be your bank contacting you, or you think there's a warrant out for your arrest, or whatever the situation may be, contact that agency or that company directly by contact information that you have for them. Never respond to the solicitation by clicking on a link or returning a phone call, because you'll just get further into the scam and become more vulnerable to it.
I totally agree. The creativity that we've seen in scams is just through the roof. I'd also contrast that with the fact that with people like you in the field doing all the education that you do, you're really arming a lot of vulnerable people with all the knowledge that they need to know real time about what to expect and what to look for. You and I talked a little bit, I think it was last week or so, but there was another scam out there. It was called the romance scam. I didn't hear you talk about that. What's the romance scam?
So the romance scam is where someone would meet somebody online, or they think it's somebody they're meeting, but again, they're impersonating somebody else. Oftentimes the scammers will steal pictures from real dating sites, and very quickly they profess their love to the victim. And shortly after, they're requesting money for a number of reasons. They have a charity, or they're starting a mission, or they're overseas, or they want to come visit. Whatever the reason is, like I said, they profess their love very quickly, they request money very quickly, and as long as you're sending money, that romance or that relationship will continue. But once you cut it off, then they quickly disappear. And it's unfortunate because, they pull at your heartstrings and then your pocketbook. And a lot of victims, fall victim to these scams.
They exploit a vulnerability. You're exactly right.
Exactly.
So Pinellas County Consumer Protection, doing this for a long time. How are you assisting residents of Pinellas County with your knowledge?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, we do promote outreach through community events, through free presentations. We want to get the information out there to make consumers aware of what's going on, what to look out for, those red flags, but also if they've fallen victim or had a situation, who to contact. I always tell consumers, I'd rather you call me than the scammer. So we provide our contact information so they have a safe avenue. Oftentimes, especially senior adults, may not be comfortable talking to their friends or family. They feel they're embarrassed, or they should have known better, or maybe the family's now going to take control of their finances, or put them in a nursing home. So I give them a safe avenue to contact to see what's going on and what resources are available. And then, of course, they can always file a complaint, and we can assist through the investigation of that complaint.
Good segue. So I suspect that my neighbor, or maybe even I feel that I've been exploited, and I understand who your agency is. How do I report this to you? How do I make a complaint?
Definitely. So you can go on our website and file a written complaint, or if you're not comfortable, give us a call. We'll mail you a paper form that you can fill out and send back. Again, we do need to have the contact information of the person who's filing the complaint, whether it's on behalf of somebody else or you're the actual victim, and then who you're filing the complaint against. Once we receive it, we will notify the business or company that there is a complaint, and we will work with the parties. We have two different sections that handle our complaints, so it'll either be deemed a civil complaint, and we have certified mediators that will work with the parties through mediation, or if it's deemed a criminal violation of a consumer protection law, then it'll go to our criminal section for investigation. They prepare the reports, and the assistant state attorneys, we have two assigned to our department, will work with the prosecution of those cases.
Very robust. As a consumer, does it behoove me to keep all the supporting documents that may have occurred during the time of the alleged exploitation? Invoices, paperwork, contracts, agreements?
Definitely. With any transaction, it's always helpful to have documentation. So the more you can provide, the better it is. So definitely keep copies of any checks, Front and back is always helpful because we can see the endorsement, invoices, contracts, any information that you have that you can provide is always helpful to have that paper trail to follow.
Yep. So I've made the complaint, and obviously this is going to turn around in moments, and everything in my life's going to be free and clear, and I'm going to be a better person. We know that that's not the case because you're going to do your diligence. But as a consumer making that complaint, what can I expect?
So like you said, it does take time. Unfortunately, we have to start at square one and look at all the facts and get all the information. But you will be contacted by an investigator once it's assigned to one of the sections, either the civil or the criminal. And they'll speak to you to get more information, get those documents. And once it proceeds, like I said, it may go through the mediation process, or it may go for the state attorney's office for prosecution. But we will be in touch with the parties and keep you informed along the way. And you have that investigator, that's the person assigned to your case. So you have that one contact that you can always contact directly through email or phone calls. So you have that person there to explain everything and inform you as the process goes along.
Yeah, and you mentioned a little bit earlier in there that, unfortunately and fortunately, that when somebody makes a complaint, it is not anonymous, which is a little different than the elder abuse side when you're making a report to the 1-800-96-ABUSE, or you're using the online information that you do it. So you really need, in order for you to conduct your investigations the best that you can possibly do, more information, the better, right?
That's true.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I was trying to remember one other thing. So, Mike, I want to go back to you real quick. Mm-hmm. It's always interesting to me, and hopefully to our viewers, is to illustrate a case. Do you have a 20-second, 30-second synopsis of an elder abuse case that you were able to investigate and determine?
Well, there's just been so many over time that, I think one thing that's important for the community to know, and this kind of ties into an example, I had a case once when I worked in Pinellas County as an investigator, where the individual was living in a tent, and that's actually even more common in Pasco County, I've discovered. But what people have to understand is, I received maybe 9 calls about this individual living in a tent. This was one of the sharpest people I've ever met, and he loved his life living out in the woods. And what people need to understand is that we do have to operate within structures, and if people want to live their life a certain way and they have the ability to do that, then we have to let them do that.
Yeah, and that's capacity to consent that
Yes.
we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, Anna Marie, I'm really happy that you're able to come on the show again. You always provide really good information. Everybody knows who to call, how to call, and what things that they need to do it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
And shameless plug, on June the 15th is World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. So pay attention to any activities that you might see in the community to shed light, unfortunately, on that day. So we hope you learned a great deal from this month's broadcast. We also hope this episode helped you understand that the issues we spoke to today are very real, and there are resources available. If you are a victim or know someone who is, at the end of the show, we'll highlight those resources again, so get your pencil ready. We'll see you next month, and until then, please maximize all the resources we shed light on today.
Many of us don't want to believe that elder abuse, neglect, or exploitation can happen to a family member, a friend, or even ourselves. Elder abuse is a growing problem and is severely underreported. Many victims are reluctant to report due to fear, embarrassment, shame, or guilt. In order to prevent elder abuse, we must take action. Don't be afraid to talk about the issue and report it to the Florida Abuse Hotline at 1-800-962-2873. Together, we can make a difference.